Hey everybody, welcome to Victory Baptist Church's Legal Clinic. And so I'm going to just give you guys just a few minutes. I know there's always just a little bit of lag time coming when we first get on. And so some people are still trying to find the link. So I'm going to give you guys just a few seconds to kind of get on and see what we have going on. And I'm also going to share this on my Facebook so you guys can see it pop up right at the start. And so we want to make sure that you do not miss out on this opportunity. This is free legal advice. So if you better get it. These lawyers out here charging, $100 an hour. So we got a lawyer out here that is sharing legal advice, especially in this season. So we want to make sure that that you guys can get this information. So join us on our Victory Facebook page or our YouTube page. And so again, this is Victory Baptist Church's Legal Clinic. And so we are super excited that you guys are joining us tonight. Again, as always, share this out. This is great information. But tonight we have Attorney Sanford Holmes, who's going to talk to us a little bit about tenant and landlord issues and problems. And so before I'm going to turn it over to Sanford, just kind of have him tell us a little bit about what he does and where his law office is, and then we'll get going.
All right. Thank you, Kelly. I appreciate it. It's good to be here on the Victory Baptist Legal. Am I one of the first, I guess, for
I want to say you are the first. I mean, other than, the pastor, but
yeah, fair enough. I'm okay going behind the judge. All right. Well, I'm honored to be here. I appreciate you guys inviting me. Sanford Holmes from the law office of Sanford Holmes. I am still kind of new in terms of my own practice, but I've been an attorney now for quite a few years. I was a practicing prosecutor and doing personal injury and some other litigation. So I just spent a lot of time in trial. I want to be able to bring that, though, to all of you, because frankly, we are not a cheap profession, and that does not mean you need to be rolling in dough to have legal problems. So my goal is to try and be able to bring that to regular people. So that's what we're doing every day. We have multiple different options in terms of how people can pay, for the particular thing they need versus some big case, and we need to be able to wait a little bit and bring the money home. Whatever it takes, we want to be able to bring that to you. And my specialty is landlord and tenant issues and consumer issues. So hope to hear from any of you guys that may need some help. I don't have that ability to put my number across the bottom here, but maybe we can share that at the end.
I can do that. So you just let me know and I'll get it out there. All right, guys. So again, this is similar to our regular platform. So we are fielding questions and comments. So you will find that at our website, and then not our website, at our Facebook page, and then our YouTube page. So if you have questions, you guys are in some wildness going on with your landlord, and you have some serious questions that you want answered as best we can, Sanford is here tonight. So before I turn it over for him to just kind of give us an overview, I want to give an example of what we're talking about when I say landlord and tenant issues. So when I was getting one of my apartments by myself, we had an issue. I know we had an issue trying to be grown, Sanford, trying to do grown things. And so we had this apartment, and we had just purchased a washer and dryer, a full-size washer and dryer. So they gave us an apartment. We told them we had a full-size washer and dryer, but they gave us an apartment that, of course, was a stackable washer and dryer. So they said, no, we didn't say that. And so we had that issue. But then what happened was, where the apartment was located, it would flood and it would have a bunch of mold and mildew inside the apartment. Yes. And so we would keep going back and forth with them, and could somebody come in, and they would, of course, would say, hey, we don't see an issue. It was like problem after problem. And back then they had, I don't know if you know this, but they had a organization similar where you could go, and it was like, these pro bono attorneys that would kind of give you some advice.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah, and you'd bring your lease, and they would give you some of the words to say. But and at the time, my husband was in law school, and so but he wasn't my husband then, but he was in law school, and so his professors were like, you should be able to get out of this situation. You're a lawyer, so
Go help yourself.
right. They were like, this is not something that we should tell you. So he ended up, going out, and then we ended up getting out of it. But so it's those types of things that I'm sure a lot of us are dealing with. And so Sanford, just kind of walk us through just some general things that everyone that is in a situation where you have a landlord that you might need to know.
Okay. That's a really good point. Kelly, you're right. When we're trying to be grown, we're learning different things, and it's just better if you don't have to learn the hard way on your own. So let's kind of start at the beginning. I do have my small presentation here. Share this screen. Make sure I get this right.
It's all good.
All right. But let's talk real quick about basic tips. Can you see this?
Yep, I'm going to add it to this. There you go.
All right. So basic tips. Starting with number one, get a written lease. I know this seems really obvious. It should be obvious. They definitely should do this. But in case they don't, make sure that you get a lease. Get it in writing. That you guys know that term. We as lawyers made it. It's one of the few things you should probably remember that we always remember that we tell you. Get it in writing. Read it carefully. Make sure you get a copy. And here in Texas, you should get a copy within 3 days, or they've done something wrong. I mean, just against the law, just right up front there. So make sure you get a copy and keep that copy for your records. Now, in your example there, Kelly, it should have been in that lease, because that's one of the things you would have wanted, that they are going to give you a washer dryer, or they're not going to, or you're bringing your own washer dryer. That's a really good time when you sit down to let them know, I'm ready to sign the dotted line. I want to live here, but they don't have your signature yet. That's when you want to get all those things together. Make sure that they're really clear. Live normally. You don't need to be too careful. If you're one of those people that ends up with holes in your walls, you need to tone it down a little bit. But other than that, just generally take care of the place. Just remember, it's just like your mom was there, and other than that, you shouldn't really have to worry about getting your security deposit back and so forth. And that's really important. You don't want to think of that as just money spent. That's important, because that security deposit can often make it possible for you to afford when you're doing your next place, those early bills when you get to your next place. So just try and take care of the place. And lastly, at the end of a lease, it's usually about a year or something like that, try and sign up for a new lease. In Texas lease, you actually do have more protections if you have a lease. I'm not going to get into all the details of that, but yes, you can probably go month to month, and there may be a situation where you need that because you need that flexibility. But if there's any way you can, try and sign up for a lease. It may be a 6-month, it may be another full year. If you're able to swing it, go for an 18-month a lease, but a lease makes things easier for you.
So one of the things that you mentioned is, so are there things that I should be concerned about when I'm reading my lease? And so because we've all been in apartments, and other thing about it is it's not just apartments, right? Mm-hmm. So some people are renting houses and things like that, and so a lease is still important in that sense as well, correct?
Yeah, exactly. And you know what, it's not even just that. If you have family that moves in for stay on the couch for a little bit, don't tell them it's not personal. It's not, but make sure you kind of write down real quick, hey, I'm going to be here for this long, and maybe they're just taking out the trash. Whatever your agreement is, just go and write it down. It makes things easier, and if things go wrong, it's a little bit easier to get a little help and remind them it's time to keep moving.
That is, I've not heard that, and that's like the most powerful thing that you said.
It is important, and you remind me of that when it comes to houses, because every so often we have that problem, or mom or dad has a grandchild, someone that moves back home for a little bit, they could be there for a while. So just kind of lay all that stuff out, and you know what? That's also helping them to again be grown. They get to learn that there are things you need to set up front. But what are other things? You hit on another really big one in Texas, which is mold. It's not as much in northern Texas as we had down in Houston. I spent a lot of time down there, but in lots of parts of Texas, mold can be a problem because it gets warm and it gets moist. and you can end up with things that can really hurt you. So one, pay attention if you see anything in type mold. It's not just that it looks gross, it can actually hurt you. Get that cleaned. Particularly get it cleaned by the landlord. Let them know about it, because you don't really know how far it gets, and there's no reason for you or your family to end up sick over that. And the other thing is, you have certain rights when it comes to mold, when it comes to a place that's not been kept up, sewage that's backing up into the place. Now, if it was your fault, you still need to take care of it, but you may be in a different situation. But things like that, don't put up with them. Look, Texas is a very landlord-friendly state. I'll admit that. There are some basics, and if they violate those basics, you have a right to be able to have them corrected. You have a right for them to take care of paying for it. And if they really want to do that, you often can get a right to get out of a lease. And that's particularly important or significant because, and I'm going to show real quick this example here. Because if you see this symbol at the top of your contract, you should know that is a group of people that are, well, they represent landlords, and everything in this contract generally is legal, but none of it is written to your benefit. All right. So it's important for you to defend yourself to the extent that you can by reading everything, by making sure that you hold them to anything that says you have a right to. And if you have questions about that, have it read by an attorney. This is a great opportunity to remind you that the law office of Sanford Holmes does something like that. We're not going to charge you by the hour. We're going to charge you some small fee to look over it and let you know what's different or what's special about your lease or things that you need to know.
So let me ask a question. So each of the leases are, so when I've seen that template at every, apartment that I've been to, right? So is that not a blanket? Is it, I think sometimes when people, especially if you live in an apartment, you've been to multiple apartments, you stop kind of reading the lease because you feel like it's the same template, it's the same information. Are they dropping in different, other than the amount of the rent, are they dropping in other information that I might need to be watchful for or mindful?
Yeah, so there's going to be a few ways in which they can do that. Lots of the times you'll see blanks, and those blanks will include little handwriting, or maybe it'll be typed in kind of saying information about your pets, for example, or when you need to pay that. They'll have to be very specific about who's paying your utilities, how often, or whether you're responsible for setting them up or leaving them going when you leave. So basically everywhere there's a blank, take a look at that, because there's a reason they didn't make that regular printed type, because they wanted to put something special in there. Even beyond that, while it looks pretty much the same from one location to the next, one apartment complex may have different needs than another. And so the different paragraphs, what they're called, they may be a little bit different. So it is worth reading through. You do not need to pay an attorney, contrary to my plug there. But sometimes it's as simple as having a friend or a family member look this over, because they just may see something else. There's no harm in that, and there's no need for that landlord to rush you into signing something that you're going to sign anyway. Right? The last thing is that you'll likely end up with a lot of other things called addendums. All those are extra parts, things like bed bugs, or obviously the pet we just talked about, sometimes utilities. Check those out. You don't necessarily need to read them detailed, but there's a reason they're a separate piece of paper. And you'll notice, because they tell you to initial it or sign it too. Never sign something or initialize something that you didn't get a read or that you don't understand. That's a piece of lawyer 101. In fact, you know what? I've lived this. I literally made the mistake when I was young and dumb, much younger and dumber than the pastor was. I was driving along and I needed to read my ticket. Now, unfortunately, a police officer does not see this the same way, so I had a long night. But the point is, I believe in reading whatever I'm going to sign, and you should too. And when it gets to leases, that's probably a good example.
So when you think about the leases and the relationship between the tenant and the landlord, have you noticed that there are some common legal issues when it comes to tenant and landlord? Are things that pretty much every time you have to get involved, it's typically this type of issue?
Yeah, the most common ones are just a landlord's not doing what they're supposed to do. They're not supposed to. And a specific example came up recently with this ice storm. Hopefully, many of you were not horribly affected by that in the long term, but lots of other people were. Busted pipes. You end up with water all over the place. It's not just that things are wet or that your stuff is harmed. It's that the drywall may be wet and can just develop mold. It's that water can leak down from someone else's place onto yours. And I've had people where the the ceiling is collapsed down, almost on them. And it looks light, but when you have something, 5x5 that falls on your head that's covered in water, it is not a small tap.
Right.
So, there's lots of things like that. Most recently, we've dealt with a fair amount of that. People that have their walls cut out so that people can get access to them, maintenance can get access to them, and those were never fixed. People that are having to pay for a vent or a fan to run, days at a time out of their own electricity. So those are some of the biggest elements. And then beyond that, the second biggest example is just evictions. Unfortunately, that's actually going to be the biggest one that we end up being talked to about. And right now, with everyone stressed financially and job wise and so forth, the good news is that we have the CDC moratorium efforts and so forth. And I'm going to go over that. If you can give me a couple minutes at the end here, I'll go over how that works in a minute. But the bad news, unfortunately, is that that's not forever. And there are things you kind of need to know about how that works. But even beyond that, there are some options you have with eviction. So if you do get evicted or you do get that notice to vacate, definitely reach out to me, reach out to an attorney at the law office of Sanford Holmes. That's something we get all the time. So we're ready to kind of quickly address that. But reach out to us and let's figure out what your options are, especially if you want to go.
So, I definitely want you to address the eviction issue, but can we go back to the pipes? And we had just as a principal, I've had a lot of teachers have that issue, and specifically one teacher where the pipes burst in the apartment. So my question is, who is responsible? Is the landlord responsible to mitigate, so what I'm thinking is if my pipes burst and my apartment needs to be fixed and water's everywhere, is it their responsibility to set me up somewhere else? Or is, how much is on the landlord to assist in that issue?
Yeah, so that's really a balance. They don't automatically need to set you up somewhere else. The question really is whether or not your place is still habitable. Yep. And the law looks at this one way, and one of us may look at it another way, and it may seem completely different to someone else. But overall, the question is, can you still use that bathroom? Can you still use that room? Let's say it's, that's a third of all your space, right? You have in your living room. Can you still use that as you normally would? And if not, yes, something needs to be done. And if they're not willing and able to take care of it quickly, sometimes you have the right to basically take care of yourself and end up sending them the bill.
I was going to ask that. So exactly. But when do I know that I'm within my right to go ahead and, hire an external plumber or somebody to come in and know that I will be reimbursed?
That is not an easy thing to determine. That's definitely something where it's if you want to be safe, you really should contact the law office of Sanford Holmes or some other attorney. But really, that's the short answer. But the longer kind of answer is you can look at it as things is what just happened something that could have possibly been your fault? Are you flushing a bunch of things down the toilet that shouldn't go, and something happened to the sewage? Then maybe it is in some way your fault. If it's just somehow a pipe burst in the wall, there's nothing you could have done to avoid that. That is on whoever owns that house or that apartment complex or whatever, and they need to take care of it. But either way, you definitely want to let them know up front, hey, here's what happened. Here's when it happened. Here's what it affected. Hopefully you have renter's insurance. I know everyone hears about renter's insurance, but it's actually very cheap. I mean, we're talking about, the cost of a family's chicken dinner for a whole month. And for that, you can get an amazing amount of coverage that would take care of all the stuff that you own in there. It takes care of people break in and take your stuff, whatever. So you want to consider that, but you want to make sure that you tell the owner when something like that happens, that it occurred and go ahead and insist that they need to come take care of it. If they disagree, they're going to tell you that, and they're going to tell you why. And then maybe you do have a disagreement and you need to talk to an attorney. But most of the time, they don't want their place to be damaged either. So they're hopefully going to work with you.
Okay. So that's really good. One of the things you said earlier was that Texas wasn't landlord friendly. Oh, they were landlord friendly. So what did you necessarily mean by that, and how does that really hurt the tenant?
I'm not going to say it automatically hurts the tenant, but what I mean by that is, there's a code that has to do with landlord tenant law, and it has a bunch of things in it. And generally, they lean themselves towards someone owning property. They think of whoever is owning the property, they envision a regular person like myself, and they're renting out their home or part of their home, and they want the rules to be really good for them, which means that when it comes to time to for something to happen, or you, in your case of the broken pipe, for you to prove that they need to take care of it, you're going to be, as a tenant, more often the one the judge looks to be like, well, what did you do to let them know about this? When did you alert whomever? Are you sure that none of that stuff, could have possibly fallen on you? So there's things like that. And then we separately have things you may have heard people talk about rent control or things like that in other big cities. That does not happen in Texas.
Okay.
We are getting bigger and bigger cities, but I do not expect it to happen anytime soon in Texas. Whatever the landlord can charge, there really are very few limits on that. There are some limits in terms of how much they can increase it from 1 year's rent, 1 year's lease to the next. But overall, the sky's the limit, and that's very
really. Wow.
Yeah, I mean, if it's a market mentality, and if I can somehow convince you, Kelly, to pay $3,000 a month for this, studio apartment because it happens to overlook the local water treatment plant, then good on me is the mindset they have. So.
Okay, that's good. So we got a question here, Sanford. It says, can you withhold rent if they do not respond? That's a great question. So going back to your example, or our example about the burst pipes, and I've reached out and they are not responding. And in this last situation, water was just kept flowing in this apartment. And they reached out to the landlord, and they didn't have any maintenance on staff. So at the time, so water is just flowing, and so could they? And even with this whole, when everybody's water was out or electricity, and so now a lot of people are like, well, I'm not paying my rent, or I'm withholding a certain amount because I didn't have lights, and my lights or my electricity is built into my my rent. So I don't feel like I should have to pay. What saith you, Sanford?
I agree. You probably don't need to pay, but that does not mean the law is going to agree, unfortunately. Again, this is one of the ways in which I talk about it being landlord friendly. What you need to do in that case is you cannot withhold all of your rent. You can arguably withhold the cost that it costs you to fix it. So let's break this down into different steps.
Yeah.
You have a pipe that just burst in your wall. It's gushing water. You should probably let your landlord know. But frankly, I'm going to bypass them and I'm calling the fire department.
Okay.
Someone that can turn off the water to my house, because that's going to be a main pipe, right? And frankly, the landlord probably wants that too, because it's going to keep a bunch of water from going all over their floors and so forth. So that's step one. But then step two is what can you do then next to take care of getting this fixed? You need to tell them, hey, this needs to be fixed. Send them pictures, so forth. Document all that. Just keep them on your phone. Phones are wonderful for this. Keep all those pictures, that video, whatever. That way, all that's time stamped. And then let them know. If it's been a day, still let them know. I'm still here waiting on this. Do that, a couple of times. And at the point when it feels like it's gone, they have purposely ignored you, then you should probably contact someone. Reach out, again, like to an attorney. This is not a major thing. Many people will actually be able to just tell you this for free. They'll be able to listen to some of your facts and say, yeah, this is probably worth you getting someone else to do it, calling a contractor yourself, paying that bill if you can, and and then passing that on or deducting that from your next rent. and
Okay.
explaining all that and including a copy of that receipt. Okay.
Okay, that's
So
really good. That was great.
yeah, I
That's
know
good.
there's a lot of steps there, but that's what I mean when I talk about it being landlord friendly. So
Okay, cool. So one of the other things that that people have trouble with, and guys, those of you that are out there that are watching, if you have questions or situations that have come up, and you have a specific thing that you want to ask Attorney Sanford Holmes, please put it in the chat, and we will do our best to make sure that he answers those questions. And so here's another question: what if the home? 2 seconds, Sanford. It says, what if the home is still damaged and no communication? Can you withhold the rent?
okay, so this is going to be a similar situation. If you're not getting communication from your landlord, again, that's something you want to document. If you send it by text, keep your screenshots of those texts. If you're sending it by email, which is all the better, because that gets to note when it happened, do that. My general goal is make sure that you've done it at least 3 times,
Okay.
before you start talking about, yeah, I'm just not going to pay. But let's put it this way. The way the law looks at it is, if you're going to withhold rent, you can't just say I'm withholding all the rent. You need to be able to have an argument for the amount of rent you withheld.
Got it.
So, for example, if something happened and now you can't use half of your house, not it doesn't look good, you're not happy about it, but you can't use it. So, for example, you can't use a bathroom because the toilet's completely exploded in there. Then you look at that as a percentage of your house, and you can say, well, look, I am not be able to use this percentage of my house, and I'm not paying this percentage of my month of my rent. Um, it ends up working backwards if you end up having this problem and you end up having to sue them, which unfortunately we have to do reasonably often. But when we do that, we then get to look at here. This is the number of days when their house was not normal, was not usable, or that they
Right.
spent in a hotel, and we get to sue them for the cost that it took to be living in a hotel, the amount of the rent from the prior month that equals that number of days. 10 days, that's a third of your month that you should arguably get back. And those are the types of things that we act on and we try to do. But when it comes to withholding rent of your own choice, you really want to be careful when you do that, because they can very easily end up trying to evict you for non-payment of rent. And then you're going to be in the hot seat in front of the judge, having to justify the amount of rent you held back. So it should almost never be 100%.
Okay. Okay. That's very good. So we got another question here, Sanford. Question says, if and we know this, so they're not responding by written communication because they know they're not responding. So they want to
Yeah.
call you only. What
Mm-hmm.
what do you do? Should you just continue to just keep emailing them back and only communicate with them via written format, or answer the phone and get into this conversation with them?
I'm a lawyer, but I'm not by definition confrontational. I don't think you should be embarrassed to just tell them, hey, look, I'm not sure what's going to happen here. I want to have a record, and explain that to them. And sometimes they're willing to do that, or they're going to come back and say, I need something that is convenient for me. If that's the case, don't be afraid to text them. Even if they don't end up texting back, you have a clear statement of what you said or what you asked and the time it happened. And even if they decide to call you, that's fine. The last thing that I like to do is, after I have a phone conversation with someone, I will email or text them back saying, so like we just went over in that phone call, you said that I have until this long. Let me know if I got that wrong. So in other
Yes.
words, you put it back on them, and they definitely have this opportunity. So when we are in court and they say, well, you know what, that's not what we agreed to, and then you say, well, that is what we agreed to, and I texted you about it, and were supposed to tell me if I was wrong, the judge is going to turn and look to them and ask, well, so what's going on, Mr. Landlord? Why didn't you say something back? Okay.
And so I could also do that via email. So if let's say
Yes.
they don't have a text option, I could answer the phone, have the discussion, and then send a follow-up email saying this is what we discussed.
Correct. And unfortunately, going back to how it's landlord oriented, there are a number of things that we are required to do in writing. So even if it turns out you need to do it by a handwritten letter, and you mail it to the address that they had to give you on that lease, go ahead and do that. If it's something important,
Okay.
do that, and don't worry about whether or not they're going to get back to you. But email works. Handwritten. I'm sorry. A written letter works, and increasingly texts tend to work.
That's awesome. Thank you. Okay, so one of the other questions. So I was talking to Mark earlier today, and I said, well, what do you do if you have a slumlord? And so he said it's not a. I'm not supposed to say slumlord. He said I'm supposed
Nope.
to say a high impact landlord.
The law does like that.
He's like, it's not a slumlord, it's a high impact landlord. So my question to you, first of all, how does the law define a slum? Like, how do I know if I'll have a slumlord or a high impact landlord?
And that's why your husband is intelligent. He knows that they do not define slumlord. That's the reason we don't use it. But no, it kind of depends on what you want to focus on there. Okay. The bottom line is that if you have a landlord that is, I don't want to say a cancer, but is really bad for the city, there are different ways in which the city has a problem with that. That means they are not taking care of the outside of their place in a way where, they're not taking care of the outside of their place in some way where they end up with rodents around it or whatever. That affects the outside area. Too many times the cops are being called to a place. That is a legitimate, straight out laws against that.
Okay.
So if you're living, and I've had clients like this, you're basically living in fear in terms of where you are. You're doing nothing wrong, and people getting shot, in the area. That there's repeated drug deals, whether you're calling them in or someone else is. At a certain point, if the cops keep having to come to a place, that is a nuisance location.
Okay.
And that is something worth pointing out. Now, I don't know that you're in a good position to try and use that as leverage against your landlord, but it is often worth pointing out to them, I noticed what's going on. The cops keep having to be called here, and that's not good for me. It's not good for you. Maybe that's your argument as to why you want to be able to move out and not have to pay some termination fee or something.
Okay.
Like that.
So I could, if I'm hearing you correctly, I could, use that. I'm sure there's a lot of, you have a lot of data to support that in a sense. But if it's dangerous, that's a reason that I could break the lease.
Yes, I'm not going to give you a blanket statement of that because obviously dangerous means different things to different people. But the good thing about the law is it is not asking people to live in situations that are dangerous below some level. And so if you feel unsafe, that's another great opportunity for you to reach out to an attorney and just explain that. Most of them will give you at least a free consultation, just as we will, and they'll at least let you know whether you potentially have something going on or may have the case. And so that's helpful. So we are the law, so Sanford Holmes with one D, so SANFORD.
Sorry.
No, it's no problem. But we really do love helping people out with that. Whenever you call, I do give like a half hour free consultation because I want to make sure people get an opportunity to at least be heard. Everyone deserves that.
That's perfect. Okay, so we do have another question out here. And so I want to be sure. It says, what if you've asked for a different living space under the same plan month to month, and they only said if you do a 12-month lease? Basically, can they force you into another lease?
So I'm not completely sure that I understand the situation. If this is a situation where you are currently on a month-to-month plan, you were under a lease, and you're asking to move in some way, then the short answer is yes, they can. Because you're basically asking to be in another location, whether this other place is the next apartment over or whether it's one of the other houses they own on the other side of the city. You're asking to be in another place, and so they can ask you to sign another lease. The only quote right you have might be to continue in a month-to-month lease where nothing else really is changing, which is you're continuing to stay in that one location.
Okay. So the only way that you could get the month to month is if you stayed in that apartment.
Or that you could keep the month to month.
Right. So I think what's happening is, and if I'm thinking I'm understanding that, if the space is not habitable, right, because of the pipes bursting, so they're requesting to go into another apartment, and if they move into this other apartment, they want to go month to month.
Yeah, so that's a little different. When you have a situation like that, you essentially have the right to move. Let's say you are 8 months into a 12 months lease and all this stuff goes down, and they offer, especially if they offer to move you, they should offer to move you if your place is inhabitable, because otherwise they run the risk of needing to pay a whole lot more to you, well, or not get as much money from you for a place that's inhabitable. But if they try to make it contingent on you entering into another lease, that is not okay.
Okay.
What would actually happen in that case is you'd move to the new place and your same lease would be continuing. In
Okay.
other words, they're making an accommodation that benefits them as much as you, if not more than. They're making that accommodation so that you'll be able to finish out your lease.
Okay.
Because the truth is, under the law, if your place is truly uninhabitable, you have it under. Well, I'm not going to start quoting actual statutes here, but under the law, you have the right to be able to apply and tell them, "Hey, I'm terminating the lease based on this fact. I can't use this place," and that's simply the way that works.
So I know one of the situations is almost kind of like where the tenant feels nervous because of some retaliation against from the landlord. So we had that with some of our Hispanic brothers and sisters, that they felt like if they said something to the landlord, then the landlord would retaliate and evict them. Or, and so, what are, what kind of things can they hang on to the fact that, what's eviction worthy? Is it, how can they just evict me because they don't like me, or I keep complaining,
Yeah. So you can only really be evicted for violating your lease. And you know what? And I say that because almost every lease includes in it violating the law, includes in it doing things that are truly uncomfortable or harmful to other people.
Okay.
So it is about, you need to have violated your lease. It cannot be because they don't like you anymore. Okay. And especially if you end up reporting something to the health department or housing or to the police that's going on there, and they for some reason suddenly have a need to evict you, you need to contact law. No, really, my email, just so you guys know, it's www.lawhomes.com. Law, HOLMES.com. That's my email. But yeah, definitely contact an attorney because that is flagrantly not legal. So to answer your question of what is eviction worthy, it needs to be a violation of the law. Now, some of these, thank you. Some of these leases will put in things like, well, you're slowing down business, or things that become very subjective.
Okay.
Currently, I definitely would love you to contact me because I'm trying to target those type of situations, because that's an inappropriate and deeply subjective element in these leases that are, I believe, frankly, inappropriate for them to be putting in the first place, and not moral for them to be trying to use. So especially if they try to come at you with something like that, you need to contact the website there on the screen.
So, and this is true. That same is true if I'm, renting a space in someone's house, or if I'm leasing a house that is owned by someone else. The same is true in that case. They can't evict me.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and again, this though gets to that issue of why you want a written lease. The more that's written down, the more it's clear what your rights are. And so also the more it's clear what you violated or didn't violate.
Okay.
At least there's as simple as, yeah, I'm going to stay here and I'm going to pay half the rent. Kind of under that one, as long as you don't, pay less than half the rent or something like that, you're kind of good to go. And that's why it's good to kind of be clear on what everything is that you guys agreed on.
So one of the other things that that you mentioned just with the with COVID and the CDC and evictions. So so talk a little bit about what safeguards did people have, and what may be changing as it pertains to evictions.
Yeah. So you're gonna have me pull out my screen here again.
Sure.
I think this one is important for people to know. So let's see what we can learn real quick. Okay. So All right, the CDC moratorium. So right now, the moratorium was originally set for the end of last year, and it's been extended a couple of times. But as of right now, it ends March 31st, which is, I believe, next Tuesday, and it's unlikely to be extended again.
Can you
Uh,
explain a little bit about what a moratorium is
yeah,
and
and
what the CDC
exactly
was
what we're
saying?
going. Kelly, you're on it. That's exactly where we're going next. And I hope everyone else is thinking with me there. What is the effect? What does the moratorium do? Moratorium just means, in this case, a pause. It is a eviction pause button. It does not mean your rent is paused. So you will continue to be racking up your same $800 a month. Still keeps adding up. Okay.
Now,
Um,
can I ask you a question?
sure.
What, how's it helping me? Sanford. So if you
Well,
pausing
so,
my rent, so then let's say you pause it for 2 months and I lost my job, and so now I'm behind $1,600. How do I ever get out of that?
well, we'll get to some of the options here
Okay.
in just a second, but the short answer is the goal here isn't for the CDC moratorium to relieve you financially. The
Okay.
goal is literally just to make sure that you don't end up out on the street and in this case, spreading COVID or getting
Okay.
COVID. And so that's really the only reason that it was instituted. But what does that mean? It means that the outcome is that you when this is all done, you could still end up evicted because you were not able to pay all of your rent, and you could still then owe all of that rent even though you've been kicked out. And I've had people that will still end up with, 4-digit, I think in one case even a 5-digit amount of money still owed, and they're no longer able to live there. So that's important to know. Second, you need to know how it works. So let's talk about that real quick.
So before you go there, so if I'm evicted, does that relieve me of any prior debt? Like, so if I
No.
missed, okay,
Just no. When you the way Texas works is they believe it's like any other contract. You received this housing for that period of time, and you agreed to pay some amount of money for that period of time. And so until you're no longer getting the housing, meaning you've been evicted, you will continue to be accruing that money. You'll keep having to own it. Then at the point when you move out or are evicted, it'll stop adding up, but it still will sit there. And they will report it to the credit bureaus and so forth.
really? Wow.
So and that kind of brings up one other thing. It's important to avoid eviction. I ended up kind of skipping over this. It's important to avoid eviction because eviction is one of those things that ends up on your credit record. And I can say this both as a tenant and as a landlord. I understand that's one of the things they look at when they decide whether they'll rent to you again at some other new place.
Okay.
This is not as big an issue after 2020 because the sheer thousands and tens of thousands of people that are going to end up with evictions is
No.
extraordinary. So this is not normal times, but in normal times, that's something that will have them just decide not even to hear your application. So you want to do what you can to avoid eviction, and that's one of the great things about the moratorium. The moratorium means, well, stop. We're not going to rule this person evicted yet. We're just going to pause everything until this end, and the end is at the end of March. Okay.
Do you find that that the tenants understand that though? They understand that the moratorium is just pausing their their rent or more for that, but that they are still responsible. Is that who is communicating that to the tenants? Is that
Yeah. So I mean, who is communicating to the tenants hopefully is any attorney that they talk to. So I'm sure that will happen. But also when you go to use this, you're going to need to show up to court. And this is actually general, if you ever get something asking you to show up to court, please do. The one way to ensure that you will lose is to not be there.
hmm,
So please show up to court. And when you do that, the courts, even the ones that have not been excited about enforcing this, they have been very clear about laying out how this works and what you
okay.
get for it. And therefore, I don't use terms like it pauses your rent. It really doesn't. In fact, not only does it not pause your rent, you keep accruing it, but they often will still put late fees on you at the same time. You know,
Oh,
so they can't kick you out, but they're going to try and do everything else that they can. And that's how
wow.
some of this money rolls up so quickly. But real quick, let's get to exactly how it works.
Yeah.
There's an affidavit that you can find online most anywhere. Again, contact me. I can connect you to that. If you want to put it up there, there's a website called Dallas Evictions 2020, all one word, DallasEvictions2020.com. On that website, they have a great link to where you get this, and you just simply print it out and you're able to sign it. Now, when you sign it, you are swearing to something. That's the items 2 through 4 there. You're swearing that you have a job that was affected by COVID. You're swearing that you're going to continue to pay your rent in whatever small portion that you can. So things are tight.
Okay.
That makes sense. If you get a little bit of money, I tell people if your rent is $800 a month, you should still be trying to pay $80 a month. Find some way to do that. It is not legally required at a certain amount, but that's a good threshold so that they know you're trying, you're doing what you can. And it will also obviously decrease the amount that you're adding up. And then the third element is that you're making consistent efforts to find rental assistance, which we're going to talk about a little more in just a second.
Okay.
But you need to be looking for ways to fill this hole. The court is looking to know that you understand you still owe this money and you're trying to get that money to these other people. You know you can't do it normally from your job or whatever, but you're trying to find that.
Okay.
And some of those rental assistance options include applying for unemployment, include applying for some of the specific locations we'll talk about in just 1 second, but applying for any place, including in your church, that will be able to give you some grant or amount of money to be able to pay off your landlord.
Got it.
And lastly, like I said, attend any hearings. If you receive something in the mail from a court saying, and your name's on it, be there. Even if it's just to give them that sheet of paper, which you actually should have given to your landlord already, but you want to be there to be able to say, yes, I did this. There have been cases where landlords show up and they claim, yeah, I didn't receive it when they had.
Okay.
And you need to be there to defend yourself. And I would love to be there standing next to you. Let's talk lastly, real quick about rental assistance options, though. Two really big ones. And these are both going to be true even after the moratorium ends on Tuesday. The Texas Eviction Diversion Program, and I've included this in case anyone wants to take a screenshot. This is the actual website. I know it's a little long, but basically you can search for TEDP, and in this case, you could look for a brochure. I don't think I have this up real quick, and I know we have a limited amount of time. But the other one is Texas Rent Relief. They both sound and they operate really similarly, but they're two separate programs. You can apply to both, and I encourage everyone to apply to both of them. Okay. And of course, there are lots of the normal ones: Salvation Army, Catholic community charities. A lot of those also have their own programs or ways that they can get some money to try and alleviate this problem. And often these are not loans; these are actual grants. So get out there and try and do that, and help whenever you have friends or family that are in this position. Try and help them do that as well. All right. That
is awesome. So you just gave us, hey, anybody who missed it, you missed it, because what I'm saying, this was thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars of legal advice
that
you just received for $0, and it was so incredibly good, Sanford, and I want to thank you. So again, guys, if you are in need of any help when it comes to landlord and tenant issues, please contact Sanford Holmes at www.lawhomes.com. And as always, you can reach out to Victory, Pastor Mark. If you missed all of this and you need to get in contact with Sanford and you forgot, contact Victory, and Pastor Mark and I can get you connected with Sanford. That was incredible. I mean, honestly, from the bottom of my heart, that was such good information. And so those of you, again, that are listening, this is on our YouTube page and on our Facebook page. So you can go back and watch it again, share it, encourage others to take a look at this and share this information, because in these times, being knowledgeable and knowing what's going on is key. And so, So don't forget Victory Baptist Church of Dallas. We're open on Sundays. And so we would love for you guys to come out. And thank you. I mean, you can, they're plugging in the comments here, Sanford. Great information. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And so guys, be on the lookout for the next legal clinic. I'm not sure who Pastor Mark has next, but they cannot be anywhere near close to what Sanford did tonight.
I don't know about that. I'm going to make sure that he has some good people. There's a lot of some great attorneys in the area, and we're going to find some way to get them out here so you guys can get your questions answered. Kelly, I am so honored and appreciative to be on the Victory Legal. What was the term here? So I get it right?
Hey, this is Victory Church Legal Clinic.
Legal Clinic. I love it. Victory Church Legal Clinic. All right. This is going right on the resume. I've been honored. Thank you so much.
That's right. Thanks everybody for joining us. Have a great evening.